seconded that the resolution as read will be received and adopted. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, let it be known by standing on your feet.
December 5th, 1955, the Montgomery bus boycott would usher in a trend of direct action against segregation. The movement manifested as a result of arrests made against people of color who resisted the black codes. First, a 15-year-old girl by the name of Claudette Colvin refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white passenger, and 9 months later, on December 1st, a woman by the name of Rosa Parks would be put in jail over the same issue. After her arrest, flyers circulated around the black community, describing this as the second arrest over this problem and that the people must rally to put an end to this discrimination. Edgar Nixon, a civil rights and union leader, organized the boycott alongside Martin Luther King, and henceforth, the civil rights movement gained more momentum in pricking the conscience of America. The boycott asked the black community to refrain from using the municipal transit system. The people ardently agreed, and not long after, official demands went out as follows. These demands were formed as a compromise towards legislators in hopes of reconciliation. However, lawmakers were hesitant to reach an agreement. In spite of this, the Montgomery community collaborated in hopes of achieving their goals. Together, there was a major effort to carpool for one another. Many black taxi drivers also offered fares that were the price of bus tickets, and even people who weren't black stepped in to assist in getting people to where they needed to go. And if all else failed, they hitchhiked, biked, or walked. It was a long struggle, lasting over a year. Previously, 75% of occupants in the public transit system were African American, and as a result of this protest, the city was losing a lot of revenue for that service. This type of civil disobedience led to the rise in the White Citizens Council, where their membership numbers would double, and lead to a series of fire bombings at black churches and even at King's own house. In the midst of this chaos and the personal attacks against him, he still addressed a crowd of his followers and stated, "If you have weapons, take them home. If you do not have them, please do not seek to get them. We must meet violence with non-violence. We must love our white brothers no matter what they do to us. We must meet hate with love." In spite of being the victim of violent retribution and preaching against retaliatory violence, leaders of the boycott were ultimately arrested. On the 21st of February 1956, King was indicted by the Montgomery grand jury for his boycott on the Montgomery City lines. According to the state of Alabama, King and 89 others violated a 1921 statute that outlawed boycotts against businesses. This would be the first of 29 arrests made through his 12 years as a civil rights leader. However, in this crushing of dissent by the government and incarceration of a peaceful figure, there came to be a monstrous soar of notoriety. Televisions across the nation saw King strive for bringing about change. The pressure from the civil disruption led to the matter being settled in district court. The 1956 case, Bratter v. Gale, declared that segregation on public transportation would be deemed unconstitutional.
The 11-month-old protest against the city buses will be called off, and that the Negro citizens of Montgomery, Alabama will return to the buses on a non-segregated basis.
This was seen as a major victory for the civil rights movement. People believed that the way life was for black people could truly be different, that in spite of all the hurdles and obstacles, taking action can truly lead to a new tomorrow. The protest was an incredibly stressful time, and yet that was only the beginning. While this kind of change was unprecedented, it also did little in transforming the daily life of the black community within Montgomery. Everywhere else, they faced the same kind of blatant discrimination. In fact, it led to a lot of severe pushback and ever-burning hatred. White supremacists induced a series of violent crimes, from shooting at buses and homes to lynchings and church bombings. In fact, the city doubled down on its segregation laws and enforced stricter regulation over ensuring that black and white people were completely separated in sports, swimming areas, and other public places. It seemed at times like it was one step forward and two steps back. Yet, what choice did they have but to keep marching forward? This is what the struggle for liberation looks like. It's not easy, it's not pretty, and it offers no guarantees, but it is what the people must do. The people have no choice but to keep going and build a better world. King was far from done. He and other key civil rights and religious leaders collaborated to create the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Together, they planned various nonviolent demonstrations to garner more attention on this pressing issue. he was undoubtedly a rising figure, and he would go on to speak directly to a national audience in 1957 at a demonstration in Washington, D.C. during the Prayer Pilgrimage for Freedom. It was here where Martin gave his speech called "Give Us the Ballot."
Give us the ballot, and we will no longer have to worry the federal government about our basic rights. Give us the ballot, and we will no longer plead to the federal government for passage of an anti-lynching law. We will, by the power of our vote, write the law on the statute books of the South and bring an end to the dastardly acts of the hooded perpetrators of violence. Give us the ballot.
As more and more peaceful events became actualized, there arose more confrontations between protesters and police. Around this time was when the FBI decided to keep close tabs on Martin Luther King. They tried to find evidence of him being a communist and attempted disinformation campaigns to get him removed internally from his place of leadership. At this point, it should be noted that King was largely unpopular in white America. He was slandered as a radical and violent man, and this caused him to receive many death threats. The first time someone attempted to take his life was in 1958 when Azurla Curry stabbed him in the chest with a letter opener. He had to undergo intensive surgery but eventually recovered and continued his journey. By 1959, he had resided in Montgomery for almost 5 years and sought to return to Atlanta and co-run the Ebenezer Baptist Church with his father. Politically, the United States was anticipating the upcoming 1960 election. However, to the dismay of participants in the civil rights movement, the topic of racial injustice was not an important focus of either party's campaign. Thus, the methods of the movement stepped into tactics that would demand the public to face the issue. In 1963, a century after the Emancipation Proclamation, King organized one of the most impactful demonstrations that dramatically shifted the course of the civil rights movement. Set in one of the most segregated places in the United States, the Birmingham campaign hoped to shut down the city to have leverage for negotiations. In response to this, protesters were assaulted by dogs, high pressures of water, and physical attacks from the local police department. Footage of this response by law enforcement led to outrage across the country. King was arrested early on in the protest, and while incarcerated, he wrote his renowned Letter from Birmingham Jail. For over a month, the people and police clashed. Protesters refused to stand by and allow the abomination of segregation to continue. Despite an incredibly large bond, King and other protesters were bailed out, and from this, he would never cease to spread his voice. Together, he and around 250,000 people marched on Washington that same year. They stood within America's capital, in front of the highest levels of power, and made themselves heard. No longer could the leaders at the top ignore this issue. It was unmistakable that the people would never back down if this neglect continued. Here, he unveiled his most quoted speech.
Injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
He continued to speak all across the country and assisted in organizing and participating in movements for justice wherever they occurred. He marched in the streets, spoke on the abuse of human rights, and never feared the odds. King made it his mission to challenge the injustice and weigh on the conscience of his oppressors. As a result of the people putting pressure on politicians, the federal government eventually recognized the hypocrisy of Jim Crow and passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, stating that discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin is prohibited. It was a piece of legislature that drastically changed the course of the United States. While the law would no longer uphold discrimination, in day-to-day life, America had a long way to go in growing out of the hatred conditioned from centuries of separation. Martin continued his work with a focus on furthering civil rights and establishing social justice. However, at the core of the struggle for equality has always lied the disparity in class. MLK repeatedly collaborated on economic issues and backed union workers striking, citizens clashing in Chicago over redlining, and even sought to oppose American imperialism. In the later years of Martin's activism, he continually weighed in on larger issues that were not exclusive to the black struggle, as he opposed the United States' effort to violently control the politics of Vietnam. This only further cemented his controversy and the disdain he received from the federal government. However, he would go further in this pursuit of championing equality across the working class, especially with his role in the 1968 Poor People's Campaign, a movement that sought to seek a solution against ever-growing poverty. King would travel speaking on behalf of class-based issues and advocated for a more equitable distribution of wealth. This divided a lot of leaders that worked with King, as the prospect of the protests had a scope of tackling large revolutionary issues, with the campaign criticizing the United States' gross spending on the military and utter disregard for the housing, education, and general welfare of its population. This was the direction of leadership Martin carried, as he felt in his heart that true justice would only be achieved if economic equality was also realized. Here was when more and more white people would join these types of civil disruptions, as the division that stems from economic class is a problem that persists regardless of your race, gender, religion, or any other orientation. He worked year after year promoting his vision of a world that still hasn't come into fruition. On behalf of the Poor People's Campaign, Martin would travel to Tennessee to show solidarity with striking sanitation workers. This is where he would give his final speech.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
The day after this speech, Martin would exit his motel room accompanied by fellow activist Jesse Jackson and musician Ben Branch. Martin walked out on the balcony after saying, "Ben, make sure you play Take My Hand, Precious Lord in the meeting tonight. Play it pretty well."
Now that I've grown up to become a man, I understand what they meant when they sang this song. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I get so tired.